Hello, can anyone see my screen? Okay, I'm just gonna assume you guys can see it. So in argumentation, you want to obviously have proofs or evidence to support your claims, to back up your claims, and you also want to have reasoning to back up your claims. So you need reasoning and evidence. And I think we talked about this in the parts of the speech where you need like the link, your claim, your link, and like evidence or something like that. And this is kind of similar, but I guess more simplified. So ARE stands for assertion, reasoning, and evidence. So the assertion is just a statement, or like we said before, the claim. It begins the argument, and it's what you're arguing for. And it's claiming something is true without providing reasoning, or evidence just yet. So it's just the claim. Next, reasoning is your because. So this is true because it supports the assertion and it provides explanation why the audience should believe your claim. But this isn't evidence, it's just explaining the evidence. And it's also known as the linked to assertion, like we said in our past classes. And then evidence completes the argument, it backs up statement and reasoning. It could be an example or illustration, a statistical data, a survey or poll, anything, any facts. So like an example of an ARE would be like, cats are better than dogs. And then your reasoning, because cats need less work, like they take less work. And then evidence could be like a poll from like 1,000 people showed that cats owners found that their cats were less needy than their dogs or something like that. Yeah, so that's just a simple format for each argument. And then next we're going to do ARE practice. So you have this grid here, and some of these boxes are missing, and you're supposed to fill them in. So the first example is already done for you. So the claim or assertion is the driving age should be raised to 18. Why should it be raised to 18? Because raising the driving age will save lives by reducing accidents. And how do we know this? Well, 16-year-old drivers have 3 times as many accidents as 18-year-olds. So yeah, that's that. And then we'll do a few of these, probably not all of these. So I guess let's start. Okay. Television is a bad influence. Why? You're supposed to fill that in. And then the evidence is when children watch violent TV shows, they imitate what they see. So you guys can just make up an explanation. Either you can like type in the chat or unmute yourselves. I don't care. Oh, Crystal, that's a good like general statement, I guess, but it doesn't really explain in depth how the evidence is linked to the claim. So you could well, you definitely could use that, but maybe like add a little more, like just a little more explanation, like maybe like after watching violent TV shows, it may lead children to be more violent, and like just a little more I guess exposition to your reasoning. But yeah, that definitely could work. Okay, next, assertion, middle schools should allow cell phones. Reasoning is that students could use the internet, and the evidence, you guys can make up something. It doesn't have to be um like an actual study. You could just make up numbers. So just like type in the chat or unmute yourself. Oh, Alvin, so that's like really good reasoning. But for evidence, you want like facts and like data. So, obviously you guys didn't research this, so just make something up, and make up like some numbers that could be used to back this claim up.
Like, I don't know.
Sorry, Dana, did you say something? I couldn't really hear you.
Yeah, I don't get it really.
Okay, so evidence is just any facts that can back up a claim. So what possible evidence could back up the claim that middle schools should allow cell phones?
Like, it lets you communicate with your parents.
So
Oh
that
no,
would
no,
be,
that's reasoning. Never mind.
yeah, that would be reasoning. That's really good
Evidence.
reasoning though.
I go to middle school, and like me and a lot of my friends have cell phones.
Okay, so that doesn't really back up the claim or reasoning, and also you obviously don't want to use like personal um like statements into like actual evidence. But if you look at the chat, Krista said more than 69% of students have a cell phone by the time they're 12. Um, that's evidence, but it doesn't really back up the claim or reasoning. The reasoning is that students could use the internet. Um, evidence could just be like um, studies show that middle schools that allow cell phones um, have like a 70% increase in students using the internet for educational purposes or anything like that that like actually explains to the listener.
All right.
uh, that was a difficult one though, so let's do the next one. This one should be a bit easier. Okay, so the claim is unknown, and then the reasoning is that eating junk food is bad for your health, and then the evidence is that junk foods are high in fat and sugar. Too much fat leads to disease. So what's the claim they're making there? Yeah, so both of these could be possible claims. Um, you could from reading the reasoning evidence, you basically get the idea that like they're painting junk food in a negative light. So both answers in the chat could work. Okay. Next, schools should not use animals for dissection because animals can feel pain. And then the evidence is blank. Yeah, so Chris, that's good evidence. That's just like a fact, which is how evidence is supposed to be. You could probably explain a little more on that, but that's like a good starting point. You could say mammals have the same nervous system as humans, and obviously humans can feel pain. So, yeah, that's true, but this is just an example. Um, Sorry, I was replying to the chat. I don't know if that you guys knew that. Um, okay, so these have multiple blanks, so that might be a little more difficult. But the claim is empty, and the reasoning is allowing younger people to vote would increase their involvement in politics, and then the evidence is also blank. So make up a claim and evidence, and obviously there's multiple answers to this, so. Yeah, so as Crystal said in the chat, um, the assertion could be anything like you should lower the voting age, or like Kaden said, the voting age should be 16, or younger people should be allowed to vote, anything like that. And then the evidence, I won't give it away just yet, but you guys are doing good. Okay, so I'll just say, you could make something up, not in a real debate, obviously, but just for this exercise, you could say, oh wait, let me check the chat. Oh wait, yeah, so Alvin says, a study comparing the qualities associated with voting, such as civic knowledge, political skills, and political interest among citizens 18 and older and citizens below 18, found no significant difference between 16-year-olds and those above 18. And then Crystal says, younger people are the most underrepresented in the voting block. So yeah, those can both work. Alvin's is a lot more descriptive. So Alvin's you probably would use in like an actual debate, but for this exercise, Crystal's works as well. So yeah, anything that could say like a study shows that like these younger people having a voice in politics would improve politics and later in their involvement in politics later in their lives or anything like that. Okay, let's do one more and then move on. So let's do the last one. So the assertion is that soccer players should be required to wear helmets. And then the reasoning and evidence is blank. Yeah, so for reasoning, you could just say like helmets will prevent head injuries, and then for evidence, you could show like a study that actually proves this, like Alvin said. Soccer players should be required to wear helmets because wearing helmets protects soccer players from head injuries in case they fell down. And, a study shows that 90% of head injuries from soccer matches are those of players who rarely wear helmets. So yeah, any evidence that shows that this is true will work. Okay, now we're going to learn a little bit about flowing, which is, let me stop sharing my screen. Which is just note taking during a debate. It's just a fancy way of saying that. But let me show an example of flowing actually. So this was an example from an abortion debate I had. Usually there's columns for each time that people will be talking, each of those speeches, and then you take notes on what the other side said, what you're gonna say, all of that. And obviously, it's really messy here. My handwriting is really messy, but it's just naturally gonna get messy because you have to write down as the people are speaking, and obviously, as we saw in the first class, in debate, people speak really quickly. So you want to write as fast as you can. You can just write down anything that you'll be able to understand because these are your notes. So you can make shortened words, abbreviations, anything that you need. You want to practice thinking quickly, which is a lot easier said than done, but again, practice makes perfect. And because of all this, flowing is really hard. So we're definitely going to practice this in our practice debates in our next few classes. And then also another thing to just know is that everyone flows differently because everyone takes notes differently. And it takes years to like really perfect your flowing. So don't be discouraged if it's really hard in the beginning or you don't get it in the beginning. But another tip during like actual debates is to make cards prior to the debate with like info. So like have a card for like in case the other side says this. If someone says this, I'll say this, and have all the information on a card so you could just like pull it out and basically read from it, and you don't have to think on your feet too much because that does make it a lot harder. Okay, so now we're gonna watch a video on flowing. Let me know if you guys can't hear it. Oh, okay. Wait, can you hear it if I like am unmuted? Is that gonna help? Wait, tell me if you guys can hear it. Okay, cool. That's great. Okay, thanks for helping, Alvin. I'll do that. Let me exit out of here. Sorry, give me a second, guys. Okay, I think it should work now. Just give me a second. Okay, cool. Let me know if it works now.
Controversial, but I don't think I would have enjoyed attending Hogwarts School for Witchcraft and Wizardry. I get it, it's literally a magical place full of whimsy and nostalgia. That said, I have some major issues. Putting aside that they are literally training children to be weapons of mass destruction, there are some pretty serious instructional issues here. For me, the one that always stood out was the use of quills and scrolls. I get it, it fits into the aesthetic, but seriously, how has a society as innovative as this one managed to ignore the need for a ballpoint pen? In competitive debate, pens are pretty important. This is because, regardless of the format, competitors and their judges need to keep a written record of the arguments made in round. We call this systematic way of recording arguments flowing. Today we will cover the process of flowing debates. We'll first discuss some of the reasons why we flow debates, then bust out our pens and walk through the step-by-step process of getting it done. Then finally, talk about some tips and tricks to get better.
But
we cannot control those outcomes in this sort of debate.
So let me read you the very first thing I wrote down in prep.
I can finally answer the question with yes.
And ladies and gentlemen, that destroys individual autonomy forever.
Why we flow debates. In order to keep your speeches clearly organized and ensure that one does not miss any of their opponent's arguments, a debater must have an exceedingly accurate record of the speeches that have presented in round. In part, this is due to the principle of refutation. In a debate, every argument is important. To help ensure that there is clash on key ideas, debaters are required to respond to each other's arguments. This always needs to happen during the next speech that you're able to do so. If a debater fails to answer an argument their opponent made, it means that they have dropped that argument. In debate, dropping an argument means to concede an opponent's argument by not answering it. You also can drop and therefore concede your own arguments if you fail to extend them during your next speech. For these reasons, having a clear and comprehensive record of the round ensures that you do not lose the round by missing key arguments of your opponents or forgetting to extend your own points. Beyond that, flowing is also critical to refuting the arguments of your opponents. A record of what has been said lets you systematically attack your opponent line by line. Debating line by line means responding systematically to the other team's arguments one by one, in the order that they were made. This is only possible if you have a flow of what they said. In practice, debaters using the line by line technique will tell the judge which claim they are answering and with every argument they make. For example, a negative team responding to an affirmative advantage might say something like this. Let's go to their first advantage. On their first uniqueness points, they claim that, then briefly summarize their argument. My answer is, briefly summarize your argument. Next on to their link, briefly summarize their argument. My answer is, briefly summarize your argument. This would continue for the rest of the arguments the affirmative made. Doing the line by line creates a wall of ink on the flow. In order for an affirmative team to rescue their advantage, they must spend time in their next speech to refute all of these points. Failing to do so will allow you to point out that they dropped your argument when it's your turn to speak next. This often means that you are able to defeat key arguments your opponent made, and in the case of the affirmative's advantage, this means they lose the ability to win. Now that you're starting to get an idea of how important flowing is, let's explain how the heck you do it. How to flow debates. Every time I teach flowing, I have at least one student claim that they have a method of taking notes that is equally effective and works better for them. Experience suggests that all of these students will be wrong. Even if you manage to develop an equally effective method of taking notes, it would be of little use because your teammates, opponents, coaches, and judges would not be using that method and would have difficulty making sense of your rounds. With that in mind, let's dive into the process. First, you need to gather the basic supplies. In order to flow effectively, you need two things: a set of multicolored pens and some blank unlined paper. I'll point out that there is a lot of debate about the types and sizes of pens and paper. My recommendation is to have a set of pens that contrast well with each other, like red and black, and to use blank legal-sized paper. Other pen colors and standard copy paper also works, but you will benefit from the contrasting colors and larger spaces to prep out your arguments. You should avoid flowing debates in a single color or with a pencil. You also never want to flow on lined paper or paper that has hole punches in it. In a typical debate round, you can expect to use 3 to 7 sheets of paper. Rarely, you may use more than that. Great, now that you have your supplies, let's talk about setting up the flow. First, let's start by orienting your flow vertically. This is also sometimes called portrait orientation when using a computer. You should never situate your flow horizontally, as it will not leave you enough space. Next, begin dividing each of your sheets of paper up into columns. You want to have one column for each speech in the debate. not including cross-examination. In Lincoln-Douglas and IPDA style debate, you would want to have 5 columns. In parliamentary, 6. Team policy debate calls for 8. When you are new, it's helpful to fold the sheets up to create these spaces. In a typical debate round, you will hear a variety of on-case and off-case arguments. Depending on the type of debate resolution and format, it can vary some. But generally, it is pretty obvious what the main arguments are of the round. For your typical policy case, you can expect that the affirmative will have a top of case, which includes framework arguments, their plan, and perhaps some solvency. They will also provide 2 to 3 advantages supporting their plan. In response, the negative will read a combination of disadvantages, procedural arguments, and occasionally a counterplan. You should allocate a separate sheet of paper to each of these arguments, meaning the top of case gets a sheet, each advantage gets a sheet, and each disadvantage, procedural, or counterplan gets a sheet. In fact and value-based debates, you will see a similar setup, but the affirmative will follow their framework arguments with a series of contentions, and the negative will typically respond with counter contentions and procedural argumentation. Just like with policy topics, the top of case gets its own sheet of paper and each contention and counter contention gets its own sheet of paper. There are 2 main reasons why we flow arguments like this. First is that arguments tend to expand exponentially as debates goes on. This means that while you might have a single point of uniqueness and your first advantage, it's possible that the negative team will make 2 responses there. When it's your turn to speak again, you may have multiple responses to their responses, and so on. Using multiple sheets lets you space out your argument so that you have plenty of room to lay out the arguments that were made. The second reason to use multiple sheets is that debaters will often reorganize the debate as the speeches advance. For example, during the first affirmative constructive, you may flow in the order of top of case, advantage 1, and advantage 2. Then, in the first negative constructive, you may be given a roadmap to flow in the order of disadvantage 1, top of case, advantage 1, and advantage 2. But come the next affirmative speech, the affirmative may choose to go advantage 1, disadvantage 1, top of case, advantage 2. By having each of these arguments on different sheets of paper makes it much easier to organize them in the road-mapped order before the time starts and follow along as the debater works their way through the arguments. When the debate begins, start with your first sheet of paper. As the speech unfolds, you will want to write each distinct argument in order from top to bottom in the leftmost column of the page. I find numbering arguments to be a useful strategy if your opponent is not providing an outline format for you. Alternately labeling common argument structures works too. For example, uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact. Keep in mind that you are just trying to get the gist of what these arguments are about. It's not possible or feasible to write down every word. If you can summarize a claim to 3 or 4 words, you will find it easier to keep up. Below the claims you summarize, do the same for any warrants read. Keeping track of citations is also helpful when it comes time to refer back and attack it. As the debater finishes each major argument, move on to additional sheets, still flowing in the leftmost column. After the first speech, there may be a period of cross-examination, crossfire, or flex. These periods are typically not flowed, but if you get an idea of an argument you want to make, write yourself a note to do so. When the negative gets ready to begin, they should start with a roadmap. This tells you the order they plan to go. If it seems like they're going to start without one, politely ask them if you could get the order before they begin their speech. This lets you put your sheets of paper in order. Note, they may not tell you specifically what kind of arguments they plan to run, but they will say something like, it'll be 3 off and then case in order. This means you'll want 3 new sheets of paper on top, and then the sheets of paper in the same order that they were presented in the first affirmative speech. You may also get opponents who are more upfront and say something like, it's going to be topicality, disadvantage 1, disadvantage 2, top of case, advantage 1, and advantage 2. The result is the same here. 3 new off-case arguments, and then the case in order. Using a different color pen, flow the off-case arguments the same way you did the on-case arguments during the first speech. When they get to the on-case arguments and start responding directly to those arguments from the 1AC, line up their responses immediately next to the arguments that they answer. This is the part of flowing that makes it easy to visualize and respond to arguments in the debate. In the third speech of the debate, you will flow the arguments of the affirmative in the third column. When they refute the 1 and C arguments, directly align their arguments next to the ones that they are refuting. Each new argument goes in a fresh row. If they point out any arguments from the 1AC and the 1NC did not answer, draw an arrow from where that argument is written on the 1AC's column to the same row of the 2AC's column. You will continue this process for each speech of the debate, going to the next column and lining up the arguments next to the argument they answer. When you get to the rebuttals, you should be flowing in the last 2 columns. Since new arguments are not allowed in rebuttals, all of the negative arguments should line up with arguments from the previous affirmative speech. If the negative does make new arguments in their rebuttal, you should note that with a star or some other indication that they are new and should not be allowed. In some forms of debate, like American Parley, it is the responsibility of the debaters to flag the new arguments their opponents make to the judge. In other forms of the debate, particularly if your speech time is pressed, there is an expectation that judges will flag new arguments in the rebuttals and protect the flow by not considering any new points that have been made. This is particularly important during the affirmative rebuttal, as the negative does not get a final chance to call out any new arguments once the debate is done. Now that you have an idea how flowing works, let's finish off with a few important tips and tricks. Tips and tricks. Keep in mind that flowing is hard at first. You will need to fight through the desire to stop if the debate gets hard to keep up with. Here are a few suggestions to make the process easier for you and the people you debate with. First, when debating, make sure to roadmap and signpost. Road mapping tells us the general order of where you're going before the speech starts. Signposting tells us where you are at on the flow and which parts of the arguments you are responding to. The more organized you are and specific you are, the easier it will be to flow. Second, develop a shorthand. Try to come up with some common symbols and abbreviations that make it easier for you. Also, there are going to be times when you hear words and terms in the debate that are too long to flow. Using acronyms or the first few letters may be enough to do the trick. Third, never give up and stop. If you miss an argument, leave some room to fill it in later and keep going. Stopping and trying to figure it out will only get you further behind. Remember, you can ask your opponents to repeat points in cross-examination. Fourth, label your arguments. This may seem obvious, but when you use lots of sheets of paper, things can get confusing. Writing some labels like top A1, A2, DA1, DA2 in the top corners of each sheet makes it easier for you to keep track of and round. Fifth, pre-flow your first speech. You know what you're going to say here. Having your arguments written down means that you don't have to try to fill in the blanks when your opponent starts refuting you. Sixth, if you're left-handed, it may be easier to flow your debates backwards starting at the rightmost column. This will keep you from covering up the arguments you're trying to write responses to. It will also minimally cut down the amount of ink you end up smearing on the side of your hand. Last, practice. Like a lot. The best way to learn how to flow is by doing it. From this point on, you should flow every round that you see, regardless if you are a participant or observer. The more you practice flowing, the quicker you get good at it. Remember, you can always pull up videos of debates on YouTube to practice on your own time. It can also be a fun exercise to put on a fast song and see if you can keep up with the lyrics. Today, we covered the process of flowing debates. We went over the reasons why you should flow debates, the process of actually doing it, and some tips to make it easier. I guess I'm not cut out for the wizardly world for a variety of reasons. Chief amongst them is I like my Pilot G2s a bit too much. That said, if you do get that letter to Hogwarts, at least what's-her-name's torture pen does not actually have to be constantly dipped in ink. Thanks for watching. This video series is written and
Okay, so I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then we're gonna move on to something else. So that was the end of our argumentation unit because we already started it last week. So now we're gonna start our refutation unit, which is really short because it's kind of like part of it's similar to argumentation. So, okay. The only note I have on this really is that attacks on opponent, like your other argument, should be clear and concise with clear wording like the other components of debate mentioned above. And you want to get your point across, obviously. Okay. So I also have a video on this, but I don't know if we'll get to it. But we're going to start with just a basic lesson on refutation. So let me share my screen. Okay. Okay, refutation is basically the act of responding to an argument. It provides a counterclaim. It responds directly to ideas of the other side and promotes a direct clash between arguments. It also answers arguments that already are in place. So you can't introduce any other new arguments in the refutation section of a debate. And it's obviously an essential debate skill because that's what debate is about. Okay, so step one is to provide directly refer to an argument and rephrase the argument. So you don't want to obviously explain their whole argument again and reiterate it. You just want to summarize their argument and what they said, and obviously which argument you're going to be going against. So, okay, after you say that, you say, but I disagree, or but this is not true, or anything that's saying that their side is wrong. And then you want to state your counter argument. So I don't agree with this. Instead, I agree with blah, blah, or instead I believe blah, blah, blah. And it can be the opposite of your opponent's claim. And this part can attack reasoning and evidence of the opponent. And then step three is because. So offer reasoning on why you disagree and why you believe this other thing, this other counter argument. So offer reasoning and evidence to enforce your counter argument. It can be independent support and can be reasoned criticism. And then therefore, you want to compare your argument or your refutation to your opponent's argument and show that your argument is better. So why is this true? Like, why is your counter argument or counterclaim better than your opponent's? And then here's just a simplified version of that. And then we're also going to do a little worksheet on this. It's just like a list of assertions. So actually I'll keep this up and then I'll read one of these, and then you guys can do the 4-step method on this. So let's do the first one. Zoos do more harm than good. You can type in the chat like either each step or all of them together, or you can unmute yourself. Okay, so Alvin, that's a good example, but we're doing the claim that zoos do more harm than good. Okay, so yeah, Crystal says they say that zoos do more harm than good. So that's step one. Step two, but I disagree because zoos provide a valuable opportunity to learn about animals not native to one's region and their habitats. So that's stating that you disagree, and then also your counterclaim, which is that zoos provide a valuable opportunity to learn about animals. And that's also step three because zoos provide a valuable opportunity to learn about animals. And then step four, therefore, zoos do more good than harm. Or you could make it even like clearer, like, oh, therefore, zoos like promote learning more, or something that really sticks with the judge. But yeah, okay, next we're only gonna do a few of these because there's a lot on here. So fast food restaurants do more harm than good. So what's the 4-step method for that? Okay, yeah, so Alvin says they say fast food restaurants do more harm than good, but I disagree because it is a quick and easy alternative to restaurant food for busy people without much time. Therefore, fast food restaurants aren't as bad as they seem. So yeah, that's perfect. So step one would be they say, and then he said the claim, but I disagree. Alvin also said that, and then because they're a quick and easy alternative for busy people, and then at the end, Alvin says, therefore, fast food isn't as bad as they seem. Okay, so we might have time for one more. Let's do recycling should be mandatory in every state. So let me keep this up. Okay, so yeah, Alvin says, and let me break it down here. So the first step, they say, so summarizing the argument, they say that recycling should be mandated in every state. Step 2, but I disagree. Step 3, because many people do not know which products to recycle and which not to. And it often takes more money to recycle things than to produce them. So therefore, his refutation is better than their opponent's argument because mandatory recycling is too extreme and does more harm than good. Okay. So that was the last one of that exercise, and then after that, after this, we're gonna watch a video, and then I don't think we'll have enough time for my last thing, so we might have to push it to next class. But let me just reshare so then I can share my audio. Okay, cool. Let me know if you guys can't hear it, but you should be able to.
Debate is enormously creative and rewards hard work. You may have seen debates on TV where people shouted, ignored counter arguments, or seemed to be in a contest about who could attack the other person more effectively. Debate tournaments are not like this at all. Students use a combination of logic, research, strategy, and persuasiveness to appeal to judges who are focused on substantive issues. Today we are going to look at one of the most important skill sets in debate: refutation and rebuttal. We will talk a little bit about the theory of both refutation and rebuttal and cover the basics of being responsive in round.
But we cannot control those outcomes in this sort of debate.
So let me read you the very first thing I wrote down to prep.
I can finally answer the question with yes.
And ladies and gentlemen, that destroys individual autonomy forever.
In argumentation theory, an objection is a reason arguing against a premise, argument, or conclusion. There are many ways to object, and we use them often in debate rounds. An objection to an objection is sometimes known as a rebuttal. Argumentation scholar Douglas Walton explains that to rebut an argument is to try to show that the argument is questionable or not supported by the evidence, or even that the evidence shows that it is untenable. In competitive debate, rebuttal is the process of defending one's arguments against an opponent's attack. Refutation, on the other hand, is the process of answering an opponent's argument. Debaters will find themselves doing both refutation and rebuttal in every debate round, and the line between the two will often blur. Additionally, both refutation and rebuttal share the same basic goal: to respond to arguments. Now that we have some understanding of what refutation and rebuttal are, let's talk about how we can use them in the debate. In order to have a good, effective debate, you need to be responsive to the arguments and counter-arguments of your opponent. In their introductory manual, authors for the International Debate Education Association explain that this means accomplishing 4 key things. First, to locate the argument you wish to answer. Next, summarizing the argument which you are responding, then responding to the argument, and finally explaining the impact. Let's take a look at these in more depth. First, locating the argument. This does not simply mean that a debater must find the argument for herself. The debater must locate the argument on the flow for her judge. In the most competitive forms of debate, the debater will typically signpost or refer to the position of the case in which the argument is found. For example, a debater may say, "Look at our opponent's uniqueness on the first advantage." This enables the judge to go to that place on the flow, locate the argument, and flow the debater's response. Without such clear signposting, judges will inevitably be confused about what the speaker is responding to. Clarity about the location is key to the judge's understanding of an argument and the debater's crafting a clear round. Second is summarizing the argument. Simply saying, "Go to my opponent's second advantage, they are wrong here because," it's not enough. A debater must tell the judge which argument he is answering so that the judge understands the argument that the debater is making in response. This summary should be no longer than 5 to 10 seconds and should include the claim and a brief description of the warrant of the argument being answered. This makes the premise the debater is challenging extremely clear to the judge. Third is responding to the argument. A response can challenge any part of the argument, the claim, the warrant, or the impact. Claim and impact level challenges typically do not respond to the reasoning provided by the opposing side. Rather, they provide alternate reasons why the claim is ultimately untrue or why the argument is less important than the opposing side wants the judge to believe. For example, my opponent argues that our plan will increase unemployment by stifling private sector growth. This is not true because the plan will increase public spending on infrastructure, thus creating more jobs. This statement does not challenge the explicit reasoning behind the opposing argument, the bill will stifle private sector growth. Rather, it challenges the claim that unemployment will go up by providing an alternate means of increasing jobs. An impact level challenge also does not address the explicit reasoning behind an argument. Rather, it explains why the argument is fundamentally less important than the opposing side wants the judge to believe. For example, my opponent says millions of jobs will be lost because private sector expansion will be stifled. These lost jobs, though unfortunate, are a necessary step to restructuring our economy for the 21st century. Again, the debater is not disputing the claim that jobs will be lost. She simply claims that the impact is a necessary evil. Thus, claim and impact level responses do not disprove the argument being answered. They merely provide alternate reasons to disregard the argument or reasons that carry greater weight than the original argument. While claim and impact challenges are perfectly acceptable, challenges to the warrants are usually the most compelling form of refutation. Challenges to warrants explain why an opponent's explicit reasoning is incorrect. Challenges to data demonstrate the opposing debater is simply making assertions unsupported by fact. For example, my opponent argues that our plan would increase unemployment by stifling private sector growth. This is not true, because the plan actually increases private sector expansion by funneling money through the federal government into the hands of private contractors. This directly challenges the opponent's warrant by explaining why the opposite effect will take place. These arguments are typically the most engaging because they target the explicit reasoning of the opposing debater. Warrant-level challenges demonstrate strong critical thinking skills to the judge, more so than claim-level responses, which do not necessarily engage the line of reasoning used by the other side, or impact-level responses, which typically are not as strong as warrant-level responses. Last, explaining the impact. After the debater has responded, she needs to explain the impact of her response. She can choose between two separate types of impacts: impacts on the real world and impacts in the debate. An impact on the real world details the effect the response will have on some element of society. It should explain in detail what will happen, good or bad, as a result of an argument. An impact on the debate details the effect the response has to an opponent's argument. It connects the argument that is being made to the ballot and decision that the judge will ultimately make. A good response will contain both a real-world impact and an impact on the debate round. For example, because the plan will not stifle but rather will stimulate the private sector, millions of jobs will be created and millions of families will be better off. This argument is central to the affirmative's position, and now that it has been turned against them, it should be clear that a negative ballot is justified. This impact begins with a real-world explanation of the argument's effect and ends with an explanation of the argument's weight and importance in the debate. Today we discussed the basics of rebuttal and refutation. We recovered their basis in argumentation theory and looked at 4 key steps to being responsive to arguments in debate rounds. Often in American public discourse, we are presented with political events that are labeled as debates. Missing from these public spectacles, amongst other things, is the clash of ideas. In competitive academic debate, you are challenged to be better than this. Clash is key to understanding and deeper critical thinking. Plus, at the end of the day, a debate without clash is boring. Thanks for watching. This video series is written and produced by me,